Augustus Ashworth stared at the computer screen, his hands trembling as the numbers confirmed his worst nightmare. Zero. Every account, every investment, every penny he had built over 30 years was gone. Mr. Ashworth, the banker's voice crackled through the phone. Sir, are you still there? The Cascade Valley project, Augustus whispered. Damien assured me it was guaranteed returns. I'm afraid Mr. Blackwater's company filed bankruptcy this morning. All investor funds appear to have been transferred offshore. We're looking at federal investigation, but recovery seems unlikely. Augustus hung up and buried his face in his hands. The study door creaked open behind him. Dad, Celestine stepped inside, her voice soft with concern. Mrs. Patterson said you've been in here all morning. At 22, his daughter possessed her mother's striking beauty and sharp intelligence. She worked part-time at the local veterinary clinic while finishing her business degree, completely unaware that her father's reckless investments had just destroyed their future. Everything's fine, sweetheart. The lie tasted bitter. Just some business complications. Celestine moved closer, those perceptive green eyes studying his face. She had always been able to read people with unsettling accuracy, a trait inherited from her late mother, Isabella. Dad, you look terrible. What's really happening? Before Augustus could answer, his phone rang. Unknown number. Augustus. The voice was smooth, controlled. Maxon Thornfield. I need more time, Augustus said quickly. The investments went bad, but I can figure something out. Time is something you don't have. Damien's associates aren't known for their patience. They'll be collecting soon. Celestine frowned, clearly catching fragments of the conversation. There might be another solution, Maxon continued. We should meet. Tonight. Bring your daughter. Absolutely not. Celestine has nothing to do with this. She has everything to do with this, Augustus. More than you realize. The line went dead. Augustus stared at the phone, his mind racing. He had heard stories about Maxon Thornfield, whispers about the mysterious businessman who controlled significant territory in Washington state through methods that skirted legal boundaries. Their paths had crossed occasionally at business functions, but Augustus never imagined he would need the man's help. Dad, who was that? Celestine demanded. Someone who might be able to help us. Help us with what? You're scaring me. Augustus looked at his daughter, so young and trusting. How could he explain that his partnership with Damien Blackwater had been more than just bad business? That he had ignored warning signs because the profits seemed too good to refuse? That now dangerous people would come looking for money he didn't have? We need to go somewhere tonight, he said finally. There's someone I need you to meet. 3 hours later, they stood in the lobby of the Thornfield Tower, Seattle's newest skyscraper. The building represented power and success, everything Augustus had lost in a single morning. A private elevator carried them to the penthouse level. Maxon Thornfield waited in an office that overlooked the city skyline. He was younger than Augustus expected, perhaps mid-30s, with dark hair and an intensity that filled the room. When his gaze settled on Celestine, something shifted in his expression. Miss Ashworth. Maxon's voice carried a strange recognition. You look remarkably like your mother. Celestine glanced between the two men. You knew my mother? We met years ago. Please sit. Augustus remained standing, his protective instincts on high alert. What exactly are you proposing, Thornfield? Your debts to Damien's associates total $2 million. I can make that disappear. And in return, Maxon's attention never left Celestine. Marriage. A binding contract that will provide your daughter with security and status while giving me something I need. The words hit like a physical blow. Celestine shot to her feet. Excuse me? You're talking about me like I'm some kind of commodity. This is insane, Augustus said. I won't sell my daughter to solve my problems. Maxon finally looked at him. You're not selling her, Augustus. You're saving her life. Damien won't stop with collecting money. He has other plans, and they involve your daughter. What are you talking about? Damien killed your wife, Augustus. And Celestine is next. Verificu contagem de characters e planju adjusts no capitulo point 2 s. Let me count the characters in this chapter to make sure it's around 5,000. This chapter is approximately 4,200 characters, which is a bit short of the 5,000 target. I should add a bit more content to reach closer to 5,000 characters, but I want to maintain the pacing and tension. Let me add a little more to flesh out the ending and Celestine's reaction to this bombshell revelation. The silence that followed was deafening. Celestine's face went pale, and she gripped the back of her chair for support. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Mom died of cancer." "The cancer was real," Maxon said quietly. "But the treatment that failed her wasn't an accident." Damien needed Isabella silenced, and he made sure she never recovered. Augustus felt the room spinning. Why would Damien want Isabella dead? Because she discovered what he was really doing with your joint ventures. She was going to expose him. Maxon moved to his desk and retrieved a manila folder. "Isabella contacted me 2 weeks before she died. She knew she was in danger." Celestine sank into the chair, her composure cracking. "This doesn't make sense. Why would you help us now?" "Because I made a promise to your mother. I swore I would protect you if anything happened to her." Maxon's voice carried a weight of old regret. "I failed to save Isabella, but I won't fail her daughter." Augustus stared at this man who claimed to hold the key to their salvation and their destruction. "And if Celestine agrees to this marriage, your debts disappear. Damien's associates back off, and Celestine gains the protection of my name and resources. And if she refuses?" Maxon's expression hardened. "Then you both disappear, just like Isabella did. The only difference is, this time there won't be any medical explanation." The courthouse wedding took place 3 days later under gray Seattle skies. Celestine stood beside Maxon in a simple white dress, her hands cold despite the warm September weather. The judge's words felt distant and mechanical as she repeated vows that meant nothing to her heart. "Do you, Celestine Marie Ashworth, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" She looked at Maxon, searching his face for any sign of the man who claimed to have loved her mother. His expression remained unreadable, professional. This was a business transaction, nothing more. "I do." The words tasted like ash. Augustus watched from the front row, guilt written across his features. 2 witnesses completed the ceremony, both employees of Maxon she had never met. No flowers, no music, no celebration. Just signatures on documents that legally bound her to a stranger. When the judge pronounced them married, Maxon's kiss was brief and impersonal. A sealing of their contract. The drive to his estate took 40 minutes through winding roads that led away from the city. Celestine stared out the window, watching familiar landscapes disappear behind them. Each mile felt like another chain around her freedom. "The staff has been informed of your arrival," Maxon said, breaking the silence. "Vivian Sterling, my assistant, will help you settle in." "How thoughtful." Celestine's voice was flat. "Will she also explain why my new husband knows more about my family than I do?" Maxon's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Some conversations require privacy." The Thornfield estate emerged from behind towering evergreens like something from another era. The main house was a sprawling colonial structure with white columns and perfectly manicured grounds. It spoke of old money and established power, the kind of wealth that had been carefully built over generations. A woman waited on the front steps as they pulled into the circular drive. Vivian Sterling was perhaps 30, with sharp features and platinum blonde hair pulled into a severe bun. Her smile was polite but cold as she approached the car. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thornfield." The title sounded wrong coming from her lips. Celestine stepped out, immediately feeling underdressed in her simple wedding outfit. Vivian's designer suit and perfect makeup made it clear who belonged in this world and who was the outsider. "Thank you. I'm sure we'll get along wonderfully." Vivian's smile never wavered, but something flickered in her pale blue eyes. "I'm certain we will. I've prepared the East Wing for your use. Mr. Thornfield thought you might prefer some independence while you adjust." Translation: they would maintain separate bedrooms. Celestine felt a mixture of relief and humiliation at the arrangement. Maxon emerged from the driver's side, his phone already buzzing with messages. "I have calls to return. Vivian will show you around." He disappeared into the house without another word, leaving Celestine alone with his assistant. "This way, please." Vivian's heels clicked against marble floors as she led Celestine through a grand foyer. The house has 22 rooms, so it may take some time to learn your way around. They passed through a series of elegantly appointed rooms, each one feeling more like a museum than a home. Celestine half listened to Vivian's tour commentary, her attention caught by the photographs lining the hallways. Most showed Maxon at various business functions and charity events, always alone or with professional associates. But in the library, Celestine stopped abruptly. A silver-framed photograph sat on a side table, partially hidden behind a lamp. The woman in the picture had dark hair and green eyes, her smile warm and genuine. She was young, perhaps early 20s, wearing a sundress and standing beside a lake. "That's my mother," Celestine whispered. Vivian moved closer, her expression carefully neutral. "Is it? How interesting. When was this taken?" Celestine picked up the frame, studying the image. Her mother looked happy, carefree in a way Celestine rarely remembered seeing. "I wouldn't know. Mr. Thornfield has many photographs from various periods of his life." The evasion was obvious. Celestine continued staring at the picture, noting details she had missed before. Her mother was wearing a ring on her right hand, an unusual design with what looked like an emerald stone. She had never seen the ring among her mother's belongings. "Shall we continue the tour?" Vivian's voice carried a subtle edge of impatience. They climbed a curved staircase to the second floor. The east wing felt lighter than the rest of the house, with large windows overlooking gardens and distant mountains. Vivian opened the door to what would be Celestine's bedroom, revealing a space that was beautiful but impersonal. "I trust you'll find everything comfortable. Dinner is served at 7. Mr. Thornfield prefers punctuality." "Of course he does." Celestine set her small suitcase on the bed. "Tell me, Vivian, how long have you worked for my husband?" 3 years. I handle his schedule, correspondence, and various personal matters." "Personal matters." Celestine repeated the phrase slowly. "That must require considerable discretion." "Indeed it does." Vivian moved toward the door. "If you need anything, please don't hesitate to ask. I'm sure we'll become quite close." Something in her tone suggested the opposite. When the door closed behind her, Celestine sank onto the bed and finally allowed herself to process what had happened. 3 days ago, she had been a college student with simple problems like term papers and part-time work schedules. Now she was married to a man who claimed to have known her mother, living in a mansion with a hostile assistant who clearly resented her presence. She thought about the photograph downstairs. Why did Maxon have a picture of her mother looking so young and happy? And why did Vivian seem determined to keep her from asking questions about it? Celestine unpacked her few belongings, hanging her clothes in a closet large enough to house an entire family's wardrobe. Through the window, she could see Maxon walking across the grounds, his phone pressed to his ear. Even from a distance, his body language conveyed tension and urgency. What had she gotten herself into? Celestine woke to silence. The estate felt different in the pre-dawn hours, stripped of its daytime formality. She had barely slept, her mind churning with questions about the photograph and her mother's connection to Maxon. By 5:30, she gave up on rest and decided to explore. The house seemed larger in the dim light, corridors stretching in directions she hadn't noticed during yesterday's tour. Her bare feet made no sound on the polished floors as she retraced the path to the library. The photograph was exactly where she had left it. In the morning light streaming through tall windows, she could see details that had escaped her notice before. The background showed a wooden dock and mountains that looked familiar. Lake Crescent, maybe, or one of the other popular spots in Olympic National Park. Couldn't sleep either? Celestine spun around. Maxon stood in the doorway, fully dressed despite the early hour. His hair was slightly damp, suggesting he had already showered and begun his day. "I was just looking around." She set the frame back on the table, but kept her hand near it. "This picture of my mother. When was it taken?" Maxon moved into the room, but maintained careful distance. "Summer of 2001. She was 23. Before she married my father." "Yes." The simple confirmation opened a flood of new questions. "How well did you know her?" "Well enough." Maxon's voice carried old pain. "Isabella was remarkable. Intelligent, compassionate, determined to see the good in everyone." "Including you?" Something shifted in his expression. "Especially me, though I didn't deserve her faith." Celestine studied his face, noting the way his jaw tightened when he spoke about her mother. This wasn't the detached businessman who had negotiated their marriage contract. This was someone who had lost something precious. "Were you in love with her?" "That's not relevant to our current situation. It's relevant to me." Celestine crossed her arms. "I have a right to know why you really agreed to help us. And don't tell me it was just some promise you made. Men like you don't risk their empires for guilt alone." Maxon moved to the window, staring out at the grounds. "Your mother saw something in people that others missed. She believed everyone deserved a chance at redemption." "That doesn't answer my question." "Yes, I loved her. I still do." The admission came quietly. But she chose your father, and I respected that choice. Celestine felt something cold settle in her stomach. How long have you known my father? Longer than he told you, I'm sure. Before she could press for more details, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Vivian appeared, looking impeccable despite the early hour. Her gaze moved between Maxon and Celestine, calculating. Forgive the interruption. There's been a development regarding the Blackwater situation. Maxon's attention snapped to his assistant. What kind of development? Perhaps we should discuss this privately. Vivian's eyes flicked meaningfully toward Celestine. She stays. Maxon's tone brooked no argument. What's happened? Damien's people have been asking questions around Millbrook. They visited the veterinary clinic where Mrs. Thornfield worked, and they've been seen at several of Augustus's former business associates' offices. Celestine felt ice in her veins. Are they looking for me? They're looking for leverage, Maxon said grimly. Damien doesn't accept defeat easily. There's more. Vivian pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages. Our sources indicate he's been liquidating assets rapidly, moving money offshore, closing accounts. He's preparing for something significant. Maxon was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly working through implications. Double the security detail. I want reports every 4 hours on any movement in or around the property. Already done. Vivian's efficiency was impressive, even if her motives remained unclear to Celestine. I'll be in my office. Celestine, we need to talk. Maxon's office occupied the entire south wing of the house. Floor-to-ceiling windows provided panoramic views of Puget Sound, while the walls displayed an extensive collection of maritime artwork. But it was the massive desk that dominated the room, its surface covered with multiple computer monitors and secure communication equipment. You're not just a businessman, Celestine observed. Business takes many forms. Maxon activated one of the screens, which displayed a complex organizational chart. Your father wasn't entirely honest about his relationship with Damien. The chart showed interconnected companies, investments, and partnerships spanning back over a decade. Celestine recognized her father's name in several nodes, but it was the prominence of Blackwater Industries that made her stomach drop. They weren't just recent partners, she said slowly. Augustus and Damien built their fortunes together. Real estate development, import-export operations, investment consulting. Your family's wealth came directly from Blackwater money. Celestine stared at the screen, watching years of her life recontextualize. The nice house, her private school education, the comfortable lifestyle she had taken for granted. All of it built on a foundation she was only now beginning to understand. What kind of import-export operations? The kind that don't require detailed customs documentation. The implications hit her like a physical blow. My father was involved in smuggling, among other things. But Augustus was always the junior partner, the respectable front man. Damien handled the darker aspects of their business. And my mother found out. Isabella discovered financial records that would have destroyed both men, but she was naive enough to think she could convince them to go legitimate. Maxon's voice hardened. Damien saw her as a threat to be eliminated. Your father saw her as an obstacle to profits. The revelation should have shocked her, but instead Celestine felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Her father's frequent business trips, the way conversations stopped when she entered rooms, her mother's increasing anxiety in the months before her death. You said you and Damien were former partners too. Maxon nodded grimly. Before I understood what kind of man he really was. I thought we were building legitimate businesses, creating something that would last. When I discovered the truth, I tried to extract myself quietly. But Damien wouldn't let you go. Men like Damien don't allow partners to simply walk away, especially not with the kind of information I possessed. Maxon pulled up another screen showing financial transactions. I've spent the last 5 years systematically dismantling his operations, cutting off his funding sources, turning his allies against him. And now he's fighting back. Now he's desperate, which makes him infinitely more dangerous. Celestine studied the data flowing across the monitors. Numbers, dates, locations, all telling the story of a shadow war being fought in corporate boardrooms and offshore accounts. Where does that leave us? It leaves you under my protection, whether you want it or not. Damien will use you to get to me, and he'll use both of us to destroy your father. Maxon met her eyes. This marriage isn't just about debt, Celestine. It's about survival. A soft knock interrupted them. Vivian entered without waiting for permission, her face pale. "We have a problem. One of our security contractors just reported in. They've been monitoring communications, and they picked up something concerning." She handed Maxon a printed transcript. His expression darkened as he read. "What is it?" Celestine demanded. Maxon looked up from the paper, his jaw set with grim determination. "Damien knows you're here, and he's coming for you tonight." The safe house sat hidden among dense woods 30 miles east of Seattle. Maxon had moved them there within 2 hours of receiving the threat intelligence, his security team executing the evacuation with military precision. Now Celestine found herself in a rustic cabin that looked abandoned from the outside, but contained sophisticated surveillance equipment within. "How long do we have to stay here?" she asked, watching Maxon coordinate with his team through encrypted communications. "Until we neutralize the threat." His response was clipped, professional, but she noticed the way his eyes kept returning to her, as if reassuring himself she remained safe. Vivian busied herself organizing communications from a bank of monitors in what had once been the cabin's kitchen. Her efficiency never wavered, but Celestine caught subtle signs of tension in the woman's carefully controlled movements. "Tell me about Cascade Valley," Celestine said suddenly. Both Maxon and Vivian looked up sharply. "What about it?" Maxon's voice was carefully neutral. "Earlier you mentioned it when you were talking about my mother. And my father lost money in a Cascade Valley project. That can't be coincidence." Maxon set down his tablet and moved to the fireplace, where he stared into the flames. Cascade Valley was supposed to be our masterpiece, a luxury resort development that would legitimize both Damien's reputation and my business portfolio. Celestine pressed. "Damien and I were equal partners then. This was 2001, before I understood what he really was." Maxon's jaw tightened. "We had secured federal permits, environmental clearances, investment commitments. Everything was proceeding perfectly. Until my mother got involved. Isabella was working as an environmental consultant. Her job was to ensure we maintained compliance with federal regulations." He turned from the fireplace, meeting Celestine's eyes. She was brilliant at her work. Thorough. She noticed discrepancies in our impact reports. Celestine felt pieces shifting in her mind. Her mother had been more than just an environmental consultant. She had possessed an almost supernatural ability to read people, to detect when something was wrong. Celestine had inherited fragments of that talent, though she had never understood its source. What kind of discrepancies? Damien had been filing false reports to cover up illegal dumping, heavy metals, chemical waste from his other operations. He was using the Cascade Valley site as his personal landfill while we applied for permits to build luxury homes on contaminated soil. And my mother discovered this. Isabella found everything. Soil samples that didn't match official reports, financial records showing payments to fake testing companies, correspondence proving Damien knew about the contamination. Maxon's voice carried old pain. "She came to me first, before going to the authorities." Celestine studied his face, noting micro-expressions of guilt and regret. Her ability to read people had been growing stronger since her marriage, as if proximity to danger had sharpened her inherited senses. "You were in love with her then. I was 28 and thought I could have everything. Success, respect, and the most incredible woman I had ever met." He moved to the window, scanning the tree line from habit. "Isabella believed people could change. She thought she could convince me to do the right thing. But you chose Damien instead. I chose what I thought was survival. Damien made it clear that crossing him would end both my career and my life. I convinced myself that Isabella would understand, that we could find another way to handle the situation." Vivian's fingers stopped typing. She was listening intently, though she pretended to focus on her screen. "What happened next?" "Isabella gave me 24 hours to decide between exposing Damien or losing her forever. She said she couldn't love a man who would sacrifice innocent families for profit." Maxon's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I chose wrong. She left you. She left Seattle entirely. Took a job with an environmental firm in Millbrook, started over in a small town where she thought she could make a difference without dealing with corporate corruption." He returned to face Celestine. 6 months later, she married your father." Celestine absorbed this information, understanding finally why her mother had seemed so determined to live simply, why she had chosen a small-town businessman over the opportunities that Seattle could have offered. Did you ever see her again? Once. 3 years later, when you were born. I received a birth announcement in the mail with a handwritten note. She said she hoped I had found peace with my choices. And had you? I spent every day regretting them. Damien became more dangerous, more ambitious. I realized I had tied myself to a man who would destroy anything or anyone that threatened his power, including the woman I loved. Celestine watched him carefully, noting the genuine emotion beneath his controlled exterior. So when she contacted you before she died, you were ready to help. More than ready. Desperate to finally do the right thing. Maxon pulled a small device from his pocket, checking for messages. But I was too late to save her. Damien had already started the process that would kill her. How do you know he was responsible for her cancer treatment failing? Because Isabella was too smart to trust conventional medicine alone. She was secretly documenting her treatment, keeping samples, taking photographs. She suspected someone was interfering with her care. He moved to a filing cabinet and retrieved a thick folder. She mailed these to me 2 days before she died. The folder contained medical records, laboratory reports, and dozens of photographs showing vials of medication. Celestine flipped through pages of her mother's careful handwriting, documenting symptoms that didn't match her doctor's expectations. She was being poisoned slowly, Celestine said, her voice hollow. Low-level toxins added to her chemotherapy drugs, enough to ensure the treatment would fail, but not enough to trigger immediate suspicion. Damien had connections in the medical community who owed him favors. Celestine closed the folder, her hands shaking slightly. And you've known this for years. I've known, but I couldn't prove it. Not in any way that would hold up in court. Damien was too careful, covered his tracks too well. Maxon sat across from her. But I made a promise to your mother's memory. I would protect you, and I would eventually make him pay for what he did. Is that why you agreed to marry me? Some kind of delayed justice? I agreed to marry you because keeping you close was the only way to keep you safe. Damien has been watching you for years, waiting for the right moment to use you against me or your father. Celestine stood and moved to the window, processing everything she had learned. Outside, she could see 2 of Maxon's security team patrolling the perimeter. Professional, alert, ready for violence. There's something else, she said without turning around. Something you haven't told me about my mother's abilities. Behind her, she heard Maxon draw a sharp breath. What do you mean? I can read people. Their expressions, their body language, things they try to hide. It's getting stronger since I've been around you and Vivian. I think stress or danger amplifies it somehow. She turned to face him. My mother had the same gift, didn't she? Maxon nodded slowly. Isabella could see through anyone's deceptions. It made her extraordinary at her work, but it also made her a threat to people like Damien. And now I'm becoming a threat too. Now you're becoming exactly who your mother would have wanted you to be. Strong enough to survive, smart enough to fight back, and capable of seeing the truth even when everyone around you is lying. A soft beep from Vivian's equipment interrupted them. She looked up from her screen, her face pale. We have movement on the perimeter. Multiple vehicles approaching from the east access road. Maxon was across the room in seconds, studying the surveillance feeds. How many? At least 6 men. Professional-grade equipment. They're not trying to hide their approach. Celestine felt her newfound abilities sharpen, reading the tension radiating from both Maxon and Vivian. But there was something else in Vivian's posture, something that didn't match the urgency of the situation. Vivian, Celestine said quietly. How did they find us so quickly? The woman's fingers hesitated over her keyboard for just a fraction of a second. But in that tiny pause, Celestine saw everything she needed to know. Because she told them where we were going. The silence that followed Celestine's accusation stretched like a taut wire. Vivian's perfectly composed mask finally cracked, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. Clever girl, Vivian said, her voice losing its professional polish. Though not quite clever enough. Maxon's hand moved toward the weapon concealed beneath his jacket, but Vivian was faster. A small pistol appeared in her grip, trained steadily on Celestine. I wouldn't. Damien wants her alive, but he didn't specify in what condition. How long? Maxon's voice was deadly quiet. Since the beginning. Did you really think Damien would let you operate for 3 years without inside information? Vivian's smile was razor-sharp. Every move you made, every plan you developed, every weakness you revealed. He knew it all. Celestine felt her ability to read people working overtime, processing micro-expressions and body language at lightning speed. Vivian's confidence was real, but underneath lay something more complex. Betrayal, yes, but also grief? You loved him, Celestine said suddenly. Damien, this isn't just about money. Vivian's gun hand wavered slightly. You don't know anything about love. I know what it looks like when someone's been abandoned by the person they trusted most. Celestine took a half step forward, ignoring Maxon's sharp intake of breath. He discarded you, didn't he? After you gave him everything. Shut up. That's why you're really here. Not just for information. You want to watch him destroy Maxon the same way he destroyed you. The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder. Through the window, Celestine could see headlights cutting through the forest darkness. It doesn't matter now, Vivian said, but her voice lacked conviction. He's here. The front door exploded inward with military precision. Armed men in tactical gear flooded the cabin, weapons trained on Maxon and Celestine. Through the smoke and chaos, a figure emerged that made Celestine's blood freeze. Damien Blackwater was exactly what she had expected and nothing like she had imagined. Medium height, average build, unremarkable features that would disappear in any crowd. But his eyes held a coldness that suggested violence was not just a tool for him, but a source of genuine pleasure. Maxon, still playing protector, I see. Damien's voice carried a slight accent, something European that had been carefully refined over years. And this must be Isabella's daughter. The resemblance is remarkable. Let her go, Damien. Your quarrel is with me. My quarrel is with anyone who costs me money. Augustus owes me $2 million, plus interest and penalties for non-payment. His daughter represents excellent collateral. Celestine found herself studying Damien with the same intensity she had applied to Vivian. What she saw made her stomach clench. This man felt no remorse, no hesitation, no human connection to the people around him. He was looking at her the way someone might evaluate livestock. Of course, there are alternative payment methods, Damien continued, moving closer to Celestine. Your mother was quite beautiful. I imagine you have inherited more than just her looks. Maxon lunged forward, but two of Damien's men restrained him immediately. Touch her, and I'll kill you. You'll kill me? Damien laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You had your chance for that years ago. Instead, you chose to play this elaborate game of corporate espionage. Very time-consuming, very inefficient. Unlike murdering defenseless women, Isabella was hardly defenseless. She was a threat to my entire operation. I simply eliminated the threat in the most convenient manner available. Damien's casual admission sent ice through Celestine's veins. The cancer provided excellent cover. Who questions a treatment that fails? Medical science is notoriously imprecise. Celestine felt rage building in her chest, white-hot and barely contained. But along with the anger came something else. Clarity. Her ability to read people was showing her details about Damien that even his own men couldn't see. You're dying, she said quietly. Every person in the room turned to stare at her. Damien's expression flickered for just an instant. Excuse me. The way you favor your left side when you walk. The slight tremor in your right hand that you're trying to hide. The medication smell on your breath that you're covering with mint. Celestine's voice grew stronger as the pieces clicked together. You have maybe 6 months. Less if the stress accelerates the progression. Damien's mask of control slipped completely. You little witch. Just like my mother. She saw through you too, didn't she? That's really why you killed her. Not because of the environmental reports. Because she knew you were already sick 20 years ago, and she figured out you were planning to frame your partners for your crimes before you died. The cabin erupted in motion. Damien backhanded Celestine across the face, sending her stumbling into Maxon's arms. But the blow had triggered something in her, sharpening her perceptions even further. Vivian, she gasped, tasting blood. Check your phone. Right now. What? Check your messages. The ones Damien doesn't know you received. Vivian pulled out her device with shaking hands. Her face went white as she scrolled through recent communications. He's been planning to eliminate all witnesses, Celestine continued, her voice stronger now. Including you. The transfer authorizations you've been processing? They're not just moving money offshore. They're canceling every contract, every agreement, every protection you thought you had. Damien's hand moved toward his own weapon, But Vivian was faster. Her gun swung from Celestine to her former lover, her finger tight on the trigger. "Is it true?" she demanded. "Vivian, don't listen to her manipulations. Is it true that you were going to kill me after this job was finished?" Damien's silence was answer enough. Vivian's face transformed, cold professionalism replaced by fury and betrayal. 3 years, she whispered. 3 years I gave you everything. Information, loyalty, my body, my soul. And you were planning to throw me away like garbage. Business requires difficult decisions. This isn't business. This is you being exactly the monster Isabella said you were. The shot, when it came, was deafeningly loud in the confined space. Damien staggered backward, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. His men spun in confusion, uncertain whether to target Vivian or maintain their positions on Maxon and Celestine. In that moment of chaos, Maxon struck. Years of careful planning and physical preparation showed as he disabled the nearest gunman and dove for cover, pulling Celestine with him. The cabin exploded into violence, gunfire and shouting filling the air. Celestine found herself pressed against the floor behind an overturned table, Maxon's body shielding hers from the chaos around them. Through the noise, she could hear Damien screaming orders, his voice high with pain and rage. "The woman who betrayed me," he was shouting. "Kill her first. Make it slow." But Vivian had already disappeared into the darkness outside, taking with her 3 years of Damien's most sensitive secrets. And somewhere in the night, Celestine could hear the distant sound of sirens approaching. Maxon's security team had not been idle during their capture. The cavalry was coming. "Stay down," Maxon whispered against her ear. "This is almost over." Celestine pressed her face against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady despite the violence around them. For the first time since this nightmare began, she allowed herself to believe they might actually survive. But as Damien's voice rose above the gunfire, promising vengeance against everyone who had betrayed him, she knew their real battle was just beginning. The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Through the ringing in her ears, Celestine heard the sound of tactical boots on wooden floors and sharp commands being issued in professional tones. Maxon's security team had arrived with federal backup, surrounding the cabin with overwhelming force. "Clear. All hostiles down or in custody." Maxon lifted his head cautiously, then helped Celestine to her feet. Around them, the cabin looked like a war zone. Bullet holes pierced the walls, furniture lay scattered and broken, and the smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air. Damien sat slumped against the far wall, his shoulder roughly bandaged by paramedics while federal agents secured restraints around his wrists. His eyes found Celestine across the room, burning with hatred and unfinished threats. "This isn't over," he mouthed silently. But his words carried no power now. The man who had terrorized her family for decades looked diminished, mortal, defeated. Whatever illness was eating away at him from the inside had finally found its match in justice. "Vivian," Maxon asked one of the agents. "Gone. Took one of their vehicles and disappeared into the forest. We'll find her, but it may take time." Celestine touched Maxon's arm. "Let her go." He looked at her in surprise. "She nearly got you killed. She also saved our lives. And she's been Damien's victim longer than any of us." Celestine glanced at the broken man being loaded onto a stretcher. She deserves a chance to disappear and start over. The next few hours passed in a blur of debriefings, medical examinations, and federal paperwork. By the time they returned to the Thornfield estate, dawn was breaking over Puget Sound, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Celestine stood on the terrace outside her bedroom, watching the sunrise and trying to process everything that had changed in the space of a single night. The marriage that had begun as a business transaction now felt like something else entirely. The man she had seen as her captor had risked everything to protect her. "Trouble sleeping?" Maxon's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him in the doorway, his formal business attire replaced by jeans and a simple sweater. He looked younger somehow, more human than the intimidating figure who had negotiated her father's debt. "Too much to think about." She gestured toward the horizon. "It's beautiful here. Isabella used to love this view." He moved to stand beside her at the railing. She said watching the sunrise made her feel like anything was possible. "You brought her here?" "Once. Early in our relationship, before everything went wrong." His voice carried old regret. I wanted to show her the life we could have together. I thought if she saw what I could provide, what we could build, she might forgive my mistakes. Celestine studied his profile in the morning light. But she wasn't interested in what you could provide. She wanted to know who I really was underneath the money and power. And when she looked deep enough, she didn't like what she found. People can change. Can they? I've spent years telling myself I was different from men like Damien. But last night, I was ready to kill him with my bare hands. Not for justice, but for touching you. He met her eyes. That kind of violence doesn't just disappear because we want it to. Celestine moved closer, drawn by the vulnerability in his voice. You're not him, Maxon. You proved that when you chose to save me instead of preserving your empire. I didn't save you. You saved yourself. And me. And probably Vivian too. He reached out hesitantly, touching the bruise on her cheek where Damien had struck her. The way you read him, exposed his weaknesses, turned his own weapon against him. Your mother would have been proud. His touch was gentle, careful, nothing like the calculated businessman who had proposed their arrangement. Celestine felt something shift between them, a recognition that went deeper than their forced circumstances. How long have you really been watching me? She asked quietly. Since your mother's funeral. I stood at the back of the church, promising myself I would make sure you were safe. When you started college, I arranged for scholarships from foundations I controlled. When you needed a job, I made sure the veterinary clinic had funding to hire additional staff. The revelations didn't shock her as much as they should have. Looking back, she could see the pattern now, the way doors had opened just when she needed them most. The night my father called you about his debts, you already knew what had happened. I've been monitoring Damien's activities for years. I knew he was manipulating Augustus, setting him up for exactly this kind of fall. I had hoped to intervene sooner, but Damien moved faster than I anticipated. So you married me to complete some rescue mission you started 20 years ago? Maxon was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the golden light. I married you because keeping you close was the only way to keep you safe. But that's not why I'm standing here now. Why are you here now? Instead of answering, he cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of her cheekbones. Because somewhere between negotiating our contract and watching you face down armed killers, I stopped thinking of you as Isabella's daughter and started seeing you as the remarkable woman you've become. The kiss, when it came, was nothing like their wedding ceremony. This was soft, questioning, full of possibility and genuine desire. Celestine felt herself melting into it, her hands fisting in his sweater as she pulled him closer. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. This complicates things, she whispered against his lips. Everything about you complicates things. His voice was rough with emotion. You make me want to be the man your mother believed I could become. Celestine looked into his eyes, seeing past the careful control to the uncertainty beneath. This powerful man who commanded respect and fear from dangerous people was afraid she might reject him. Maxon, she said softly, I need you to know something. What? I can read people, remember? And when I look at you, I don't see someone who's trying to replace what he lost. I see someone who's finally ready to love what he's found. The relief that crossed his features was so profound it took her breath away. He pulled her against him, holding her as if she might disappear if he loosened his grip. I never expected this, he murmured into her hair. Never thought I deserved it. Maybe that's why it's real. Celestine pulled back to meet his eyes. Because neither of us chose it, but we're both brave enough to see where it leads. Around them, the estate was beginning to stir with the normal sounds of mourning. Staff arriving for work, security teams changing shifts, the business of life resuming after a night of violence and revelation. But for Celestine and Maxon, standing together in the dawn light, the world had narrowed to just this moment. The recognition that their marriage of convenience had become something neither had dared hope for. Something real, something worth fighting to protect, something that might actually be love. 3 days after Damien's capture, life at the Thornfield estate had begun to settle into an unfamiliar rhythm. Federal investigators had finished processing the scene, security protocols had been updated, and the media attention was finally dying down. Celestine found herself in the strange position of being married to a man she was actually beginning to love. She was reviewing files in the library, helping Maxon identify assets that needed to be returned to Damien's victims, when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your father needs to see you. Millbrook Cemetery. Come alone. 1 hour. V. Celestine stared at the message, her blood growing cold. Vivian was supposed to be hundreds of miles away by now, yet somehow she was back in their small hometown. Maxon, she called, but received no response. A check of his office revealed it empty, his security team reporting he had left for an emergency meeting with federal prosecutors in Seattle. Another text arrived. If you bring anyone or alert security, your father dies. I have nothing left to lose. The cemetery lay on the outskirts of Millbrook, a peaceful place where her mother was buried beneath an ancient oak tree. Celestine arrived exactly on time, her senses hyper-alert as she scanned the area for threats. The place appeared deserted except for a single figure standing beside Isabella's grave. Vivian looked haggard, her usually perfect appearance replaced by rumpled clothes and hollow eyes. But her hand remained steady on the gun pointed at Augustus, who knelt beside the headstone with his hands zip-tied behind his back. You came. Vivian's voice carried exhaustion and something else. Desperation. Let him go. Whatever you want from Maxon, this isn't the way to get it. What I want from Maxon? Vivian laughed bitterly. I don't want anything from him anymore. I want the truth. The truth your father has been hiding for 20 years. Augustus looked up from his kneeling position, his face gray with fear and something that might have been guilt. I don't know what you mean, he said. Tell her. Vivian pressed the gun against his temple. Tell her what you really did to Isabella. Celestine felt her ability to read people working overtime, processing micro-expressions and body language at lightning speed. What she saw in her father's face made her stomach drop. Dad, I didn't mean for it to happen, Augustus whispered. I never wanted her to die. But you helped it happen, Vivian said coldly. Didn't you, Augustus? You helped Damien poison your own wife. The words hit Celestine like physical blows. That's not possible. Tell her about the medication switches, Vivian continued relentlessly. Tell her how you substituted her real chemotherapy drugs with the ones Damien provided. Tell her how you watched your wife grow weaker every day and did nothing to stop it. Augustus's shoulders shook with silent sobs. She was going to destroy everything. The business, our reputation, our future. Damien said if she exposed him, we would lose everything we had built. So you chose money over my mother's life. Celestine's voice was barely above a whisper. I chose our family's security. I thought if Isabella just stopped investigating, if she focused on getting better, maybe there was another way. But she wouldn't let it go. She kept digging, kept threatening to go to the authorities. And Damien convinced you that killing her was the only solution. He said the poison would just make her weak, confused, enough to discredit anything she tried to reveal. I didn't know it would actually kill her. Augustus looked up at his daughter with desperate eyes. You have to believe me, Celestine. I thought I was protecting you. Celestine stared at this man who had raised her, who had kissed her scraped knees and taught her to ride a bicycle and walked her to school on her first day. The father she had trusted and loved her entire life. You watched her suffer for months, she said slowly. You held her hand in the hospital while she died from poison you had given her. I tried to stop it. Near the end, I tried to get her real medication, but it was too late. The damage was done. Tears streamed down Augustus's face. I've lived with that guilt every day since. Not guilt, Vivian said sharply. Selfishness. You were more concerned about protecting your comfortable life than saving the woman who loved you. Celestine felt something breaking inside her chest. Not just her heart, but her entire understanding of who she was and where she came from. The father she had thought she knew was a stranger, a man capable of murdering his own wife for money. Why are you telling me this? She asked Vivian. Because Damien's organization doesn't die with his capture. There are others, people who will come for you and Maxon to finish what he started. And because your father has been lying to everyone, including the federal investigators. Vivian pulled a tablet from her bag, showing financial records that spanned decades. Augustus wasn't just a junior partner in Damien's operation. He was the money launderer, the respectable businessman who made everything look legitimate. Half of Damien's criminal profits went through companies your father controlled. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. Celestine's comfortable childhood, her education, everything she had taken for granted had been built on blood money and her mother's murder. Where's the money now? She asked. Hidden in offshore accounts, real estate investments, shell corporations. Enough to make Augustus one of the wealthiest men in the state, if anyone knew how to trace it properly. and you want me to help you find it. I want justice for Isabella, and I want to make sure Damien's successors can't use those resources to hurt anyone else. Vivian's grip on the gun tightened. Your father is the only one who knows all the account numbers, all the passwords, all the hiding places. Celestine looked between the two people who had shaped her life in such different ways. Her father, revealed as a coward and murderer, and Vivian, a woman who had betrayed everyone but was now seeking some form of redemption. There's another way, Celestine said slowly. A way that doesn't require holding anyone at gunpoint. What do you mean? Turn yourself in. Cooperate with the federal investigation. Help them trace every dollar, expose every crime. Make sure everyone involved faces justice. Celestine met Vivian's eyes, including my father. Augustus made a strangled sound of protest, but Celestine ignored him. You want to honor my mother's memory? Then finish what she started. Use your inside knowledge to tear down everything Damien built, everything my father helped him maintain. And what happens to me? Augustus asked desperately. You face the consequences of your choices. 20 years too late, but finally. Celestine's voice was cold as winter steel. You murdered my mother, Dad. There's no amount of guilt or regret that changes that. In the distance, she could hear vehicles approaching. Maxon had discovered her absence and activated his security protocols. Soon this cemetery would be surrounded by armed professionals. You have maybe 3 minutes to decide, Celestine told Vivian. Keep running and spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, or stay and help make this right. Vivian looked down at Augustus, then at the gun in her hand, then at Isabella's headstone. Whatever internal battle she was fighting played out across her features in micro-expressions that Celestine read like text on a page. Your mother was the only person who ever showed me genuine kindness, Vivian said finally. When I was working for Damien, infiltrating Maxon's organization, she would have been well within her rights to hate me. But she saw something in me worth saving. She always did that. Saw the best in people even when they couldn't see it themselves. I want to be someone she would have been proud to know. Vivian lowered the gun slowly. Even if it costs me everything. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder. Soon this place would be filled with law enforcement, federal agents, and the machinery of justice that had been 20 years delayed. But for now, in the shadow of her mother's grave, Celestine felt something like peace beginning to grow in the ashes of her shattered illusions. The truth was finally coming to light. And perhaps, in that truth, she and Maxon could build something honest and lasting. Something her mother would have approved of. Something worthy of the love they were discovering together. 6 months later, Celestine stood in the same courthouse where she had been married under duress, but everything about this moment felt different. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating flowers that friends had brought to celebrate. Maxon waited at the altar in a simple gray suit, his eyes filled with the kind of love that had nothing to do with contracts or obligations. Do you, Celestine Marie Ashworth Thornfield, take this man to be your husband, to love and cherish, in freedom and in joy? I do. The words carried the weight of choice this time, of a future they were building together. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of federal investigations, asset recovery, and painful revelations. Augustus was serving a 20-year sentence for his role in Isabella's murder and decades of money laundering. His cooperation with authorities had helped dismantle what remained of Damien's criminal network, but nothing could restore the trust Celestine had lost in the man who had raised her. Damien himself had died in federal custody 3 months earlier, his illness progressing rapidly under the stress of imprisonment. His final weeks had been spent providing information about hidden assets, perhaps seeking some form of redemption before death claimed him. Vivian had become an unexpected ally in the aftermath. Her detailed knowledge of Damien's operations proved invaluable to investigators, and her testimony had sealed convictions against dozens of associates. She was currently serving a reduced sentence in minimum security, using her time to pursue a law degree. Her letters to Celestine spoke of finding purpose in helping other victims of financial crimes. You may kiss your wife. Maxon's lips found hers with a tenderness that still made her heart race. Around them, the small gathering of friends and associates applauded, but Celestine was only aware of this man who had become her anchor in the storm. They had transformed the Thornfield business empire over the past months, liquidating questionable investments and redirecting resources toward legitimate enterprises. The foundation they established in Isabella's name now provided environmental consulting services to communities threatened by corporate malfeasance. It felt like the right way to honor her mother's memory. The reception was held at the estate, but in the gardens rather than the formal rooms that had once felt like a prison. Tables were arranged beneath the ancient oaks, string lights twinkling as evening approached. Celestine had insisted on simplicity, on celebrating their love rather than displaying wealth. Any regrets? Maxon asked as they swayed together during their first dance. Only that it took us so long to get here, honestly. She looked up into his face, marveling at how much had changed since their first tense encounter. Do you ever think about what would have happened if Damien hadn't forced our hand? I think we would have found each other eventually. Your mother always said that some connections transcend circumstances. He spun her slowly, her dress flowing around them. She believed in destiny, in people finding their way to where they belonged. And where do we belong? Here, building something that matters, something that helps people instead of exploiting them. Maxon's voice grew serious. I spent years accumulating power and wealth, thinking that would make me worthy of love. You taught me that worthiness comes from how we choose to use what we've been given. The guests began to disperse as the evening wore on, leaving Celestine and Maxon alone beneath the stars. They walked hand in hand through gardens that no longer felt like part of a fortress, but like home. I have something for you, Maxon said, reaching into his jacket. The small velvet box contained a ring unlike any Celestine had ever seen. The center stone was an emerald, but it was surrounded by a unique setting that seemed to capture light and reflected in patterns that shifted with movement. It belonged to your mother, Maxon said softly. She was wearing it the day we met at Cascade Valley. I had it made for her, thinking it would convince her to forgive my mistakes. She left it behind when she walked away from me. Celestine held the ring up to the starlight, watching the way it seemed to hold fire within its depths. Why didn't you give it to her when she contacted you before she died? Because I knew she wouldn't accept it. She had moved beyond our past, found happiness with your father despite everything that came later. But I kept it, hoping someday I might find someone worthy of wearing it. And now I know that love isn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It's about choosing each other every day, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. He took the ring from her fingers and slipped it onto her right hand, beside her wedding band. Your mother was the first woman I loved. You're the last woman I'll ever love. Celestine felt tears gathering in her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me we'll always choose truth over convenience, justice over profit, love over fear, even when it costs us everything. I promise. And I promise to spend every day becoming the man you deserve, the man your mother believed I could be. They stood together in the garden where Isabella had once walked, where Celestine had first begun to understand the depth of the secrets surrounding her family. The past would always be part of their story, but it no longer defined their future. In the distance, the lights of Seattle glittered like fallen stars. The city where Maxon had built his empire, where Celestine had discovered her strength, where two people from different worlds had found common ground in their shared commitment to something better. 5 years later, Celestine stood in the same garden, but now she was not alone. A dark-haired toddler chased butterflies between the flower beds while Maxon followed at a careful distance, ready to catch her if she stumbled. Isabella Rose Thornfield, Celestine called. Come help Mama with the flowers. Their daughter turned at the sound of her name, revealing green eyes that sparkled with intelligence and mischief. She had inherited more than just her grandmother's name, but also her ability to see through people's facades to the truth beneath. The foundation they had built now operated in 12 states, with a legal clinic that provided free services to environmental crime victims. Vivian had joined the organization upon her release from prison, bringing her skills and her determination to make amends for her past. Augustus remained in prison, though he and Celestine had begun exchanging letters. Forgiveness was a process, not a destination, but she was learning to separate the father she had loved from the man who had made terrible choices. Their relationship would never be what it once was, but perhaps it could become something honest. Mama, look. Isabella held up a dandelion that had gone to seed, its white puffs ready to scatter on the breeze. Make a wish, baby girl. Isabella closed her eyes tight, concentrating with the seriousness only children could bring to important matters. Then she opened them and blew, sending dozens of seeds dancing through the air. "What did you wish for?" Maxon asked, scooping his daughter into his arms. "That Grandma Isabella can see us from heaven, and that she knows we love her very much." Celestine felt her heart swell with a mixture of grief and gratitude. Her mother had died before she could see the woman her daughter became, before she could meet the granddaughter who carried her name. But in some way, Isabella's legacy lived on in every life they touched, every wrong they helped make right, every choice they made to serve truth over convenience. "I think she knows," Celestine said, watching the dandelion seeds drift toward the sky. "I think she's been watching over us all along." As evening approached, they walked back toward the house where laughter spilled from open windows and the smell of dinner beckoned them home. The Thornfield estate was no longer a fortress against the world, but a place where love had taken root and flourished beyond their wildest dreams. Behind them, the garden held its secrets and its memories, but ahead lay infinite possibilities. A future built on foundation of truth, seasoned with justice, and bound together by a love that had been tested in fire and emerged stronger than steel. The contract that had brought them together was long since forgotten, replaced by vows they renewed every day through their choices and their commitment to each other. They had learned that the greatest love stories are not about perfection, but about redemption. Not about finding someone who completes you, but about becoming someone worthy of the love you've been given. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all.